Hi there! Today we're talking about the amazing BOUDEKA. BOUDEKA was a female warrior set in the year 16 AD, and she was, a goddess, so to speak, in her time. Well, at this point in time, Caesar Augustus Nero was king over the whole of the Roman Empire across Europe. And well, he was a dictator, he was a king, who was practically robbing the people, taking everything that they worked for, and living large. Around this time, there was a mythology, there had been prophecies, that there would come a woman, a queen, a goddess who would be the savior of the people, who would be like a response to Caesar Augustus. And well, did she come? All right, let's move into the rural areas where there were also smaller kings of smaller colonies. And well, one of the kings was a very down-to-earth guy. He really did everything he could to cooperate with, the bigger authorities under Nero. And he was married to this beautiful queen, in a small nation. So, nations under the nation, let's say colony, or let's say county, or let's say state, depending on what you see it as. So they had two young daughters, and well, these princesses were being brought up as well as their parents could. In those scenes, you could see a lot of family values. You could see love, a lot of love between the father and the mother, and it was really, really wonderful to see that the king of Assyria and his queen were really bringing up their children to build confidence in them, to make them everything that a great future queen or a great royal would be. I remember that there was a prophecy that from the so-called barbarian tribes would come a queen who would become the savior of the people. Well, when one of the nobles put it to Caesar Augustus Nero, he decided that he was going to curb it, even though there was prophecy and there was all of that. He said, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make sure that this prophecy doesn't come true. So he made sure, he decreed that no woman was going to take a position of authority, that women were no longer allowed to take, large, big offices within the nations that he was governing over. By the way, Caesar Augustus Nero was actually a very young boy, practically a teenager, and he was ruling the best way he knew how to, maybe probably making a lot of rash decisions, very selfish ones, but well, I would say that he was doing the best he could. All right, well, let's go back to the land of Assyria, the nation of Assyria, where the king and the queen were trying to bring up their children as well as possible. I know as girls growing up in the palace, one of the things they would do was, go for classes that have to do with, beauty, makeup, cosmetics. And one of these days, they had gone for their makeup class. And the queen saw a beautiful fabric, that one of the instructors was wearing. And she asked her, where did you get this? And she described one of the local markets where she could get it for a very low price. This queen, who is very adventurous, decided that after the class, she was going to go to the market with her daughters and her maid. And, she got there, a very local market. You could see from the environment that it's not the kind of place a royal should be in. But well, she decided she was just going to go. As they were going into the place, you could hear her slave or her servant saying to her, this is not where you should be. It looks there were actually people who were hanging, people who were being punished for theft and all of that. Anyway, she went ahead with the daughters. When here she is inside the market, And some of the warriors were gathered, drinking, talking, and, chatting away. When one of the female warriors turned, that female warrior is going to play a very prominent role in this movie. She was the leader of that cluster of warriors, one of the boldest, one of the most loyal ones. And she turned, and here she sees the queen and her daughters. Her eye catches her, and she looks, straight into her eyes, and she walks closer, and suddenly she falls to her knees and bows to her. She raises her head and says, "BOUDEKA." And there was a bit of confusion. Why are you kneeling? Like, who is BOUDEKA and all of that? Well, the other male warriors came up, they were laughing at first, but she shouted at them and told them, "This is BOUDEKA." This is, that she could see from what she had been taught from, she could see that this person was from their tribe, was a queen. She has achieved a lot for herself. And from the story that maybe she had heard from her family lineage and, mythology, she could tell that this person was going to be a great person and was going to play a huge role. And then she made sure that the other guys also knelt down. Well, there was a bit of ruckus after that because one of the other nobles who were around began to accuse BOUDEKA's servant of, instigating those people to kneel down, and she was, he was a bit upset, and before you knew it, he was rough handling, the queen herself. This really got the female warrior very upset. Before you knew it, she had drawn her sword and cut off the hand of this man. And when she felt, that she was really upset and he had done wrong to the queen, who, remember, at this point, she's referring to as the goddess BOUDEKA, she turned and cut off his head. And well, you can imagine in a local market setting, this made, everybody go into, there was chaos in the market, and she was running. Even the queen had to run away with her kids, with her daughters. And when she gets home, by the time she gets home, word had already gotten, to Augustus Nero and to the royal clan, among the rulers of the nations. And remember, her husband had also gone to work, where the kings go to work. And well, he was called to a council of leaders of, the Roman Empire. And he had to defend his wife's honor, saying she was not a troublesome person. He was sure she had not played a role, and, he pleaded on her behalf, saying she's just an ordinary woman. She never, she didn't bring up any of this. And well, I think for that particular period, his pleas were heard and it was okay. But he had warned his wife as much as possible, do not go out, don't go to such places. Why did you go to that market? Stay indoors, please, we don't want any trouble. Augustus Nero is a young man and he can be very volatile. Anyway, she decides to obey her husband and stay indoors. One of those days, her husband decides, that's the king, decides to take a trip in the company of one of his very good friends, who is also a native, one of the royals in his own clan. And he goes ahead and does this. By the way, just before that time, one of the royal regents had come through their land, and he had, he was a bit abrasive. He was confrontational. He was throwing words here and there, doing things to upset them. But, the king, by his nature, is a calm and very kind person. He decided to overlook all that particular regent had done. And, okay, so back to the present, he went on a trip with his friend, who we later found out betrayed him, had reached out to the regent and told him beforehand that himself and the king were coming through the forest on so and so day and time, and there was an ambush which led to the death of the amazing king of the Assyrian nation. Okay, so we're watching and we see mourners, or an entourage of people come and tell the queen that her husband has passed, that he was killed on the road, which of course leaves her very angry. She was crying, she went into mourning and all of that. Remember that they are the king and the queen of the Assyrian land. And well, there's a vacuum because there's no heir. Okay, remember they have 2 daughters. So automatically, the queen is now crowned ruler of the Assyrian people. That particular regent who came visiting earlier was also invited to come for the coronation. He had also been giving half of the land of the Assyrian people, to kind of placate him and, make him feel like, they were not in any kind of contention. The queen had written to him and told him that he could have half of the land and all of that. So he arrives at the coronation and, approaches seemingly peacefully, and well, he greeted her, and it seemed like everything was good. But before you knew it, he became violent. He said she was an impostor. He said there was no way, according to the king's law, that she could become queen of, the Assyrian land, that he was not going to only take half of the land that she had offered him. He was taking the whole of the land, and he was going to whip her in front of her people. He was going to whip her as a warning to anybody who would try this kind of thing. In other words, he was saying that she tried to bribe him and that she had broken the law on purpose and she was going to be punished. And we see the queen in all of her majesty being stripped, being molested, being tied to the stakes and flogged in front of her people. Many of them tried to resist. Some of them were screaming because she was a loved queen. Herself and her husband had been the best ruler that a nation could wish for. And well, she was flogged and nobody could really do anything because there were so many soldiers around. And of course, remember, this is the dictatorship or the authoritarian government of Augustus Caesar Nero, who the regent he was representing Augustus Nero. All right, so we move on. She was beaten, and even branded meaning that, an iron brand, an iron crest, so to speak, like a seal, was put into the fire and, really made hot, and it was branded onto her face, which was the brand of slaves and, people who they were saying, you are now owned, you're now the property of Augustus Caesar Nero. And well, she was unfortunately put into prison. Now we move to the next scene where we see the young warrior, the same warrior who came into the market, who knelt down, who recognized her as BOUDEKA. She broke into the place where the confines of the prison where she was being kept, and they had killed all the guards who were there, and they rescued BOUDEKA, dragging her out half alive, taking her to another settlement far away, and looking after her, making sure that she would be okay. Well, we're going to fast forward. While BOUDEKA was in camp, she was also, the warriors also did an amazing thing, which we might have to refer to later on. They were also able to smuggle out BOUDEKA's daughter, the queen's daughters, and her sword. Just before her husband died, he had presented a sword to her. He told her, this sword is part of the dowry that your father gave me when I was marrying you. It belongs to your people who were of the barbarian tribe. And this was his very significant sword. While, as soon as she collected the sword, she kind of became another person, some kind of spiritual connection to an heirloom that she was given, she was presented. Anyway, so they were now in the camp with the warriors, and her daughter, when she finally woke up, her daughters are brought to her. Her wounds have been treated. She's getting better, but she's still very bruised. They had knocked out some of her teeth while they were beating her, while they were flogging her, and they found some false teeth, and fixed back in her mouth. And, she's no longer the same person. She's no longer the same person. But, well, still very weak. And then, this warrior begins to tell her about the mythology and, how it had been said some thousands of years before that they would have a savior who would be, a royal from the Roman Empire, and that she would become the savior of the people. I don't think at this point the queen took it seriously. I don't think she took it seriously, but she had already started learning the art of warfare even while her husband was alive, and she was teaching her daughters to defend themselves, and they went on doing that. And well, she continued in training, carrying her daughters along until one of those days she had come out, and the female warrior brings to her the sword which she was able to smuggle out from the palace when she rescued her, and presented it to BOUDEKA. It was at that point it became clear that there was really something extraordinary about the queen and about the sword. Okay, so she began to train with the sword, and there were so many supernatural things, like magical things happening whenever she was handling the sword. And well, it began, and many of the times when those things would happen, they would happen right before the people, the other warriors. As as time goes on, they begin to realize that this is indeed, even if she's not going to be the acclaimed BOUDEKA, this is somebody who the gods have chosen, so to speak. At this point, one of the royals from a surrounding tribe, who is also like the top leader of another clan, comes in and he says, "I've heard about you. They say you are going to be the leader, but I don't think so. I think that I should be the leader of this people." And there was a bit of an argument between them when he collects her sword and breaks it into two, and he throws it into the nearby river. We see BOUDEKA begin to panic. Remember that it was a gift given to her by her husband, her late husband, and it was given to him to keep for her, till the right time, by her father, her late father. And remember that the sword had meant a lot to her. So she runs off, moves away from there, jumps without thinking about it, jumps into the river, to the base of the river, and picks the sword that was broken and thrown into the river. When she comes out from the river, we see BOUDEKA arrive where all the royals and the warriors were, holding a brand new sword. The sword she had picked that was broken had straightened itself and was even looking newer than before. At that point, the new incoming guy realizes that there is something here. There's something that the gods have something to do with, and they all bow to her. All right. At this point, she's now declared the queen of the people. She's no longer the queen of Assyria. She's now the queen. She now steps into her position as Queen BOUDEKA of the barbarian people. Barbarian, so to speak, is one of the local, lesser recognized tribes in the whole of the Roman Empire. Well, remember that she has just been widowed, she's bereaved, and she's still in pain and shock because her lands were taken away. She was treated and humiliated badly. So she now goes on a revenge mission. She wants to cripple the royal empire, and it seems like it's not possible because these are just, mere, local warriors who don't really have a lot of training. But as time goes on, you see people, other warriors from different clans who were also trained and, wind on the stories and the mythology that there would one day come a savior, a female warrior who would save them. They come, and before you know it, the army is large and very formidable. So they begin to plan to attack different regents and different officials of, personal officials, very high-ranking officials of the Roman Empire. And well, they would go into the forest and, attack an entourage from the palace and collect all of the takings, the taxes that these people were unjustly taking from the people. Remember that Caesar Augustus Nero had been very unfair to the people. He was taking all they were working for. They were practically slaves in their own land. So they had begun to collect, they would enter, kill everyone and collect, officials, regents and all of that. One of those cases, she was attacking and she came across the regent, who himself was the one who killed her husband, who was responsible for killing her husband, who took her lands and all of that. And need I say, she wasn't nice to him. She killed him, and at that same time, they found this so-called friend of her husband who was hiding somewhere in the woods. They brought him out, and she also, gave him a horrible death. She stabbed and stabbed. It was very, very personal. Anyway, they continued to not only kidnap and collect the things, the riches and the taxes that are being collected for Caesar Nero. They begin to go into towns, into very fortified towns. And because this army is large and they are on a revenge mission, remember she, Boudekka, is the savior of the people. They go in and they begin to take over nations and they begin to, cripple cities and large cities, and until they take, they took some of the very, very largest cities, under the Roman Empire at that point. I know they particularly went to Cambridge, they went to Camulus, they went to London, and at this point they were going to London. Their fame had spread across the land. Caesar Nero had heard about them. He was terrified, and when he got information that Boudekka and her warriors were coming into London to take over the city, Caesar Augustus Nero, the young king, became very, very, very scared for his life. Even when he was offered help by some of the surrounding kings, he declined, and at that point he committed suicide. And it could be at this point that you would say it's a victory, but well, it is what it is. All right, so that we don't make this too long, it was a season of terror. It was a very, very violent film. Lots and lots of blood, lots and lots of, violence, cutting off of people's heads, maiming, and, the army, Boudekka's army was brutal and always, always winning. They had, an amazing streak of luck. You would say supernatural luck, and I would think that sword that Boudekka was holding had a lot to do with it. Anyway, the king had killed himself, and it was the other kings. There was only one very prominent king among them who was left, and he decides to take revenge and says that he would achieve what Caesar Nero was not able to do, and he goes on a revenge mission, getting together a very, very professional army. They were large, they were the best of the best, very well trained, and they began to get ready to go to war with Boudekka's army. Just before we go into the war scene where Boudekka and her army were against this other king, the general who had come, to help Boudekka, the one who broke her sword earlier on, had become, like her right-hand man. He was always with her. And as he kept on fighting at her side, he had fallen in love with her. And well, he had warned her about this next war they were supposed to go in with the king who had promised that he was going to destroy Boudekka. He had warned, he said the men were tired, they needed to rest, and that he didn't think it was a good time to go to war with them. But Boudekka, strong-headed, remember, she's angry, she's still very angry, she's still filled with myth, with anger, and she's still on a revenge mission. But she was also fueled and reassured by the fact that no other army had ever been able to conquer them, whether home or abroad, So she said she was going to go. One thing that had happened since Boudekka's victory started was that while the first war was going on, unfortunately, heartbreakingly, her daughters, both of them, were killed. But as the film goes on, you would see Boudekka actually physically see her children. And, her children had become her dead children, and their ghosts or spirits had become her guardian angel. So even when there was something that needed to be done and nobody knew what to do, the royals or her servants, her royal men, would say, ask your daughters. And, it was the spirit of her daughters who were consistently telling them what to do, and that was how they were able to have so many victories. Anyway, at this point, the general who is with Boudekka says he's not going to go into war. He's not going to be at her side this time. And her daughters say to her, we don't think you should go for this war, but if you must, you cannot do it without him. He's in love with you. Why don't you agree and lay with him, and that will make him drop his defenses and still be there with you. But Boudekka, remember, was the queen of a king that loved her so well. She was a widow who still loved her husband, and she said, as far as she was concerned, there was no other person than the king of Assyria who had died, who was late. And she was not going to do that. She wasn't going to sleep with, this general, as much as he liked her, as much as he loved her. Well, she didn't. So you see him packing his things and his men. They were going to leave. He promised that he was going to come back, but as much as possible, she shouldn't go to war before he comes back. And she didn't heed the warning. She went to war. At the war scene, remember that the other side was made up of very experienced, very top, the best of the most trained army in the Roman Empire were together on the other side. And then there was also the amazing Boudekka's army, which, who I would say were not really that trained, but they had been on a winning streak because of the sword and, the fact that Boudekka, was sent by the gods, so to speak. Anyway, at this time they engaged in the battle, and wow, it was different. As they got into it, the other side started killing off Boudekka's army, firing arrows at them from every side. They had their strategy was in place. Actually, the army from Boudekka's side was, they were surprised, they were surrounded, they were dying, and it was very, very heartbreaking. For you, if you were supporting that army, you would be heartbroken. We could see all of them. It was clear that they had already lost the battle even before they started it. Well, so Boudekka and her female warrior, who had become, her chief security officer, were cowering in a corner, watching what was happening around them. It was unbelievable, because remember, up to this time, nobody was able to defeat her army. Well, she looks up and she sees her daughters, who say to her, "Mom, it's time to come back and become a mother and a wife again. It's over. You have lost, you are going to lose this battle. Today, you're going to be back with us." And this was a heartbreaking moment when after a lot of bloodshed, almost all of the army was dead. It was just remaining Boudekka, and she was surrounded by the soldiers and, of the opposing side. And, even then, they were still afraid of this woman who had become a legend in her time, leading armies to over and over again, take victory over so many lands. And, well, when she decided to make a move, quickly, you could see about 20 soldiers launch at her with spears and swords. They, pierced her, and, the death of Boudekha on that ground was heartbreaking. You would, it wasn't fair at all. Of course, it wasn't fair, but the soldiers acted in fear so that she would not disappear or something. They had heard so much about her. They were so scared. They had they decapitated her. They did everything that was, they killed her in a very gruesome manner, a terrible manner. And well, there goes the end of Boudekha, the goddess of the Roman Empire. And today, if you go into Europe, you would still see a lot of statues and monuments to the great goddess Boudekha, who was alive, who came in the year 16 AD to rescue her people. This is the story of a woman who came and practically saved her people from what it was. After that time, remember that the dictator Caesar Augustus Nero had died, and things became a bit better for the people. But then it took the coming and the death of their savior, so to speak, Boudekha, to get the freedom for the people. Till today, she's revered amongst those tribes as the one who came. Just as, Christians would say Jesus, they would say that Boudekha came to save her people. And well, that's the story. It's something that you should watch. Remember that this is the spoiler zone, where we tell you everything that happened in the film. And it's something that if you haven't watched, even though you've heard all of this, still go, and you would have a fantastic time watching the movie Boudekha. Until I see you same time again, take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Bye.